You're not going to make me out to look bad, are you? It's not a matter of looking bad or looking good. I am concerned with the truth.
There's no thrill like a good kill.
In the summer of '85, there was a serial killer randomly killing people.
The man Californians are calling the Night Stalker.
They caught my Uncle Richard a mile away from our house.
You don't understand me. I am young, good and evil.
Satan is a stabilizing force in my life.
He has eyes that devour you.
He went from being the human being to the Night Stalker, the sex symbol.
I asked him, can you wave to me? He looks over and I'm like, oh my gosh, he actually did it.
There's some things that we never understand, and we may never have the answers to.
I saw somebody who was complete evil.
She earned the ultimate prize to be the bride of the Night Stalker.
You love this man with all my heart.
Do you think that evil can be reincarnated?
I hope so.
The serial killer's latest victim was Bill Carnes, a businessman from Mission Viejo. Carnes was shot in the head early Sunday morning, his fiancée sexually assaulted. Police are now looking for an orange station wagon seen in the area.
James Romero, who's a 13-year-old kid in 1985. It wasn't until James identified the car and gave a description that they got a fingerprint and were able to put a face to the name.
The individual who we believe is responsible for these crimes, a man by the name of Richard Ramirez.
He landed in the bus station, walked right past the police, walked into a liquor store and noticed that his face was all over every newspaper in Southern California. People started to realize there was a problem with this guy. They came out of their homes, they grabbed him, they beat him within an inch of his life and left him on the curb.
We saw the sheriff's deputy who had this man in custody. We told him it was Richard Ramirez. On the way to Hollenbach Station, I picked up my mic and I said, bingo, we got him.
The house was dark when police stepped inside, the kind of darkness that felt heavy, unnatural. A window stood open, its screen cut cleanly away. Inside, drawers were pulled out, glass lay scattered across the floor, and silence pressed in from every corner. There were no alarms, no witnesses, no clear explanation for how someone had entered so quietly and left so much devastation behind. Long before Southern California learned his name, Richard Ramirez was shaped in places far from the glow of city lights. He grew up in El Paso, Texas, in a home where violence was not an exception, but a constant. His father was physically abusive, and fear became part of daily life. For Richard, chaos was familiar, and stability was not. As a child, he spent time with his older cousin Miguel, a Vietnam veteran who filled his head with graphic stories of war and murder. Miguel didn't just talk about violence, he glorified it. He showed Richard photographs taken overseas, including an image of himself posing with the severed head of a woman he had abused and killed. These moments were not hidden from Richard. They were presented to him as something to admire. When Richard was 13 years old, that violence became unmistakably real. During an argument, he watched Miguel shoot and kill his own wife. Miguel was later found not guilty by reason of insanity and eventually released. For Richard, there was no closure, no sense of justice, only the lesson that brutality could exist without consequence. By his early 20s, Ramirez drifted through life, unstable and increasingly detached. In 1982, he left Texas and headed west, blending into the vast anonymity of California. He lived transiently, moving between cheap rooms and stolen cars, committing burglaries and feeding addictions that kept him awake through the night. No one noticed him. No one had a reason to. If you've been following closely, now is the moment when the ordinary begins to slip toward the unthinkable. And if you value stories that look beyond headlines to understand how darkness takes shape, consider subscribing to Midnight Casefiles log and turning on notifications. Because the man, who would later terrify millions, was still invisible. And that made him dangerous. By the time the violence surfaced in patterns police could recognize, Richard Ramirez had already been moving through California like a ghost. In 1984, the first confirmed murder linked to him slipped quietly into the background noise of the city. 79-year-old Jenny Vinca was found dead in her Los Angeles apartment, her throat slashed, her body stabbed repeatedly. There was no immediate connection to anything else, just another brutal crime in a city used to tragedy. Then, months later, the silence broke. In early 1985, attacks began to multiply, scattered across neighborhoods with no clear logic. Homes were entered at night. Victims were chosen seemingly at random. Some were beaten. Some were shot. Others were sexually assaulted. A few survived long enough to describe their attacker. Men, women, elderly couples, and children all became targets. The randomness was the most terrifying part. There was no profile that guaranteed safety. Los Angeles was already haunted by memory. Less than a decade earlier, the hillside strangler had left the city traumatized. Now, fear returned, sharper and more unpredictable. Detectives struggled to determine whether they were dealing with copycats, unrelated crimes, or something far worse. Slowly, connections emerged. Survivors described a similar man. Crime scenes shared disturbing overlaps, and at several locations, investigators found the same clue, a distinctive shoe print from a men's Avia sneaker. Detective Gil Carrillo began to suspect what others resisted believing, that these crimes, despite their differences, were the work of one offender. As spring turned into summer, the attacks escalated. The city felt hunted. People slept with lights on, guns sold out, windows were nailed shut, and still the killer moved freely. If this story has you leaning closer, feeling that tension build, take a moment to like this video. It helps keep stories like these told, not sensationalized, but remembered. Because by mid-1985, police knew the truth. They weren't chasing chaos anymore. They were chasing a man. By the summer of 1985, the hunt narrowed and the pressure intensified. Reports poured in from across Southern California, Monrovia, Burbank, Arcadia, all telling the same story. Nighttime break-ins, sudden violence, a man who vanished before dawn. On July 5th, 16-year-old Whitney Bennett was attacked with a tire iron in her Sierra Madre home. She survived. On her comforter, investigators found yet another Avia sneaker print. For detectives Gil Carrillo and Frank Salerno, doubt was gone. This was one man. More clues followed. A stolen Toyota linked to an attempted abduction was abandoned after the suspect fled on foot. Before running, he drew a pentagram into the dust on the windshield. Inside the vehicle, police found a business card for a dentist in Chinatown. Records showed a recent patient using a false name, Richard Mina, and X-rays revealing a distinctive impacted tooth. Police missed him by days. Meanwhile, the violence accelerated. Joyce Nelson was murdered in Monterey Park. Sophie Dickman was sexually assaulted nearby. Then came the Nading murders in Glendale, a killing in Sun Valley, a botched double shooting in Northridge, and another execution-style murder in Diamond Bar. Ballistics linked the crimes. So did the shoe prints. So did the symbols left behind. When authorities finally revealed these connections publicly, fear exploded. Tips flooded in. One witness reported an orange Toyota station wagon. Another linked it to a theft in Chinatown. Police found the car, and inside, a fingerprint. It was the break they had waited months for. As the pieces came together, the city held its breath. If you've stayed with this story, take a moment to like and share this video. These details matter, and so do the victims behind them. Because the man who had stalked California's nights was no longer invisible. And the city was about to recognize his face. The morning Richard Ramirez saw his face on the front page of the newspaper, the hunt ended in chaos. Inside a downtown Los Angeles liquor store, he glanced down at the headline and realized the city finally knew who he was. He ran. What followed was not a police chase, but something far more raw, a reckoning carried out by the people he had terrorized. Strangers recognized him, shouted, and gave chase. He sprinted across the freeway into Boyle Heights, desperate, reckless, exposed. Cornered in a neighborhood he did not know, Ramirez tried to steal cars from passing drivers. He failed. One man struck him with a metal pole. Others surrounded him. By the time police arrived, a crowd stood over the man they believed, correctly, was the Night Stalker. Newspapers were waved in the air, his face pointed at again and again. When officers took him into custody, Ramirez reportedly admitted without hesitation, "It's me." The trial that followed stretched on for years, heavy with testimony and grief. Survivors faced him in court. Evidence piled up: ballistics, shoe prints, fingerprints, witness identifications. In 1989, Richard Ramirez was convicted of 13 murders, 5 attempted murders, 11 sexual assaults, and 14 burglaries. He was sentenced to 19 death penalties. The courtroom erupted, not in celebration, but in exhausted relief. Ramirez would never be executed. He died in prison in 2013, still awaiting death row. But his shadow lingered long after. For Southern California, the damage was permanent, trust shattered, nights forever changed. As you reflect on this story, ask yourself, how does a city recover when evil walks through unlocked doors, choosing victims at random? And if stories like this matter to you, take a moment to like, share, and subscribe to Midnight Casefile Log, and turn on notifications so you don't miss what comes next. Because some nightmares don't fade with sunrise.